Okay. Hey, folks. And Stanley here for probably the second one of these evening sessions with the Serverless London User Group. Today, we're talking all about Lambda Powertools. We have Haitor and Sarah from AWS, and then Jan Churi, the burning monk himself, is joining us. He's suddenly frozen while he's praying. I don't hopefully this is not going to be that bad. Jan's back. There we go. Yeah. So yeah, we're going to be talking about Lambda Powertools. It's got a bit of a history. So Jan, I'm actually going to pass over to you. And do you want to maybe talk about what the Lambda Powertools that you wrote, or you were part of the team at DAZN, where you created like your own distinct kind of Lambda Powertools project, and then Sarah and Haitor, to talk through, how AWS has taken that concept and kind of evolved it, and your kind of new set of tooling.
Yeah, so I guess that actually goes back to before DAZN. Before DAZN, I was working with a startup called Yabo, and we're building a social network. And that's probably when me and a few friends of mine really got, fully on board with the server on the serverless train, and we're doing everything with serverless, API gateway, Lambda, everything. That was really good. And one of the things that we really quickly noticed is that we're doing the same thing over and over, and there's a number of things that you really have to achieve a consistency across all of your functions in order to reap the benefit. Things like correlation IDs is a pretty good example of that, where unless everything in your entire core chain agrees to handle correlation IDs the same way, you're not really going to get much benefit from it. If one function is expecting correlation IDs to be called a different thing compared to another function, then suddenly everything just breaks. So you need to have, repeatable patterns that you can use across multiple functions. And you also need to have, a convention that everyone kind of agrees to how it treats data that's coming in and out of your function. And that's when I wrote the first version of Lambda Powertools. The company went bust, ran out of money, unfortunately. So that initial version died with the company. So when I went to DAZN, we kind of started. Same thing came up again. We were using Lambda in a lot of different places. Hello. And
that's going to happen again. I'm sorry in advance.
That's fine.
That's fine. My cat
cool.
was sleeping in the bed behind me. So yeah, the same thing happened again. We got lots of people using Lambda, and certainly, we needed things like correlation IDs. We needed to encourage best practices through shared tooling, and so that's when I decided to bring back the idea, and then wrote a version of Lambda Powertools when I was at DAZN. And I guess a lot of work went into supporting correlation IDs so that we can have correlation IDs flowing through Lambda functions, whether it's behind API gateway or if it's behind, say, event bridge or DB streams or SQS or SNS. Doesn't matter what it is. We want to be able to see those correlation IDs in the logs without people having to spend a lot of time to write custom code to support that. And a lot of that came down to just having middleware that's intelligent enough to extract the correlation IDs in the right places, because that's the convention that everyone has agreed to. For example, if it's HTTP call from or to say API gateway, you want to extract the correlation IDs from the headers, and the headers named X dash correlation dash something. And if it's SNS message, you want to take it from the message attributes. If it's SQS, you want to take it from somewhere else. So those kind of conventions need to be in place, and everyone needs to agree to it. And that's where this kind of shared tooling comes into it. And over time, that got expanded to include other things as people have more use cases. I think one of the folks in the Sarah's team had a use case where they need to obfuscate some of the fields so they don't get logged, things like names and emails of customers. So they wrote that, and then the middleware to obfuscate based on the regex so that we don't log PII information, which for something like DAZN is very important because it's going to get audited and regulated at some point. And yeah, so you kind of just grew from there. And I guess later on, Haitor caught wind of what we were doing and liked the idea, and standardize that across multiple languages, where we were just focusing on JavaScript because the zone was just using JavaScript for everything in Lambda. Obviously, AWS has got a lot more customers with more language support, supports. So Haito kind of took the ideas and ran with it, and Sarah's been helping him with the TypeScript version as well.
Cool. Haito, do you want to talk us through the whole process of actually trying to get Lambda Powertools off the ground? Particularly, you're not based in Seattle. You were in the UK, and now you're in the Netherlands.
All the three of us are in the Netherlands, right? The three of us are in the Netherlands, right?
Yeah. So we've got a South African in London, and then an Italian, a Brit, and Brazilian in the Netherlands today, as you do. So yeah, Hato, do you want to talk us through the whole process of open sourcing Power Tools and basically getting the people to build it, because you don't have a product budget. It's effectively a tool from your team, and maybe tell us a bit more about what your team does.
Yeah, wow, that's gonna be a long answer. So let's break into parts. How did Lambda Powertools happen from the AWS side? So in 2017, I started a project called Serverless Lens. You probably have heard of it. It was a white paper back in the days, basically aggregating everything we've seen from customers, what works, what actually doesn't work, and only tell you what actually works and the trade-offs when you're about to choose multiple services and guiding principles and stuff like that. Eventually, that evolved in 2020 into the console. So now if you go to the AWS well-architected tool, you will be able to review your application using a set of questions and 47 best practices for that. The challenge with that, after nearly 10,000 customers, we found, looking at the data, that most customers were having challenges of implementing that before they reviewed their application. So I'm mostly at the point where I've already designed my application, I have my architecture, it's now in production or about to go to production, and I realized, I don't have tracing, I don't have structure logging, I don't have my custom metrics, I don't have X, Y, Z. How do I handle partial failures? How do I handle security pieces? How do I do validation correctly? All these things kind of start to show to us that the guidance was there, but it was mostly discovered late. Developers weren't actually looking into all those guidances before they developed those applications. So the idea was, why not bring this early as possible to them? So then the first question was, okay, how do we name this thing? What are the common practices we're going to implement already? There's too many best practices to include, and some are infrastructure based. And then the inspiration came from Jan and the whole Dazan team behind it. Dazan Engineering did a great job on showing utilities like correlation ID and handling timeouts and a bunch of things. But what I found was I needed something that it was supposed to follow the footsteps of these giants at Dazan, but give it birth to a lot more customers, a lot more use cases that it could help them ease adopting best practices, and it wouldn't stop at observability, because observability is a tiny piece of a much bigger thing. So then in 2019 at reInvent, I was showing the serverless airline project and how you could do it too. However, it was incredibly hard to do it from the AWS side too. And Lambda Powertools, we started with tracer, metrics, and logging first. And then with only 3 lines, you could get all these things started. Eventually, is now 14 features, nearly 6 million downloads, nearly 600 customers using production, and it's just it's exponential now. So that's basically Powertools. And then we have folks like Mark Sales and Pankaj from the Java. We have Steve and Tiago and a bunch of other folks on the .NET. And then Sarah stepped in and said, I want to lead this TypeScript thing. I know one thing about TypeScript. And, it kind of all went from there.
I don't think I remember it went like this. I think this is a colored memory. But definitely we were talking about it. And by the way, I got in touch with Aitor thanks to Jan, because Jan was like, oh yeah, when you join AWS, just talk to Aitor. It's great, blah, blah. So really, I think Jan is how we got us connected as well. And I know Jan because we used to be colleagues at the Zone. So I used to work at the Zone as well. So it's all like, yeah, solar circle. Anyway, yeah, so thanks, Ater. Sorry for interrupting.
No, it was on purpose, so at least.
Yeah.
I think for the second batch of questions was, what does my team do? It's not my team. I just part of the whole team. So we're doing in Europe, Middle East and Africa, Australia, Asia Pacific, and we are beginning now in America. So it's called Devax, or AWS Developer Acceleration. We are a bunch of specialists who are also developers who work with strategic customers. So we help them either modernize a monolithic microservices, distributed systems, or trying to build something new. So we basically almost like consultants, if you like, trying to help them. Here's 200 plus services. Here's how you choose them, the trade-offs, when to use one over the other. Here's the tooling. Here's when to use open source versus AWS tooling based on what you know, based on your institutional knowledge. So it's a more targeted focus. And we use that knowledge of helping customers get to production into, we're missing developer tooling. We're missing references. We're missing better documentation. We're missing this and this. And we take this and we try to work with some of the service teams and say, here's a list of paper cuts across services that sometimes you wouldn't see if you were just building using that service alone. And then we try to bake that into Lambda Powertools or other pieces. That's what we do, AWS Devax.
Yeah, I think what the Heiter touched on there is the real spirit of something like the Powertools is that it should be easy to do the right thing. And as much as you can have guidance, people have to read it, have to digest it, have to understand it before they can actually turn that into implementation. So having libraries that let you do, that let you apply those best practices easily out of the box and consistently across the entire organization or entire community, that's where I think the power of something like Powertools really comes in.
So,
exactly.
Talking Powertools now, we've got a few questions around TypeScript. TypeScript is the latest language that supports Powertools, but obviously the design Powertools were JavaScript implementation on day one. The AWS Powertools are a spiritual successor, but obviously it's not the same code base, a completely different code base to the AWS Powertools spiritual successor. So, Heiter, you start off with Python and Java, and then Sarah, you've taken on TypeScript for your sins. Probably, TypeScript's one of the most popular languages in the world right now. It's built on top of JavaScript, the most popular language in the world. Why? And just give us a rundown on what your plans are for the TypeScript version of Powertools and where you are today.
So right now we recently launched the beta release, which means that right now it's a developer preview. And the goal of this phase is essentially to get feedback from the community, which we are getting. I love to see, by the way, thanks for everybody who is joining, a lot of the question, it would be nice to have the correlation ID. I love the way it was done in the zone. What about, I saw something else, open telemetry as well. So a lot of what we do, because it's AWS and also, of course, because of our Lambda Powertools team, is we are driven by customer demand, developers. We want to help. And of course, the best way for you to drive the direction in our roadmap would be to create a feature request and to kind of help us understand what is your use case and how would you implement it and what kind of problems does it solve. So, and this is also the whole point, the reason why we opened it for the TypeScript. But so in terms of features, you can expect it follows the same tenets as the other languages, the other Powertools runtimes, the AWS one. And you can expect at least the core utilities to have to be delivered for sure with the same behavior, the similar functionalities. When it comes to everything else, of course, we're going to vet utility by utility. What is going to be most useful for customers, for developers? What do you want? What do you want us to do? And what are the problems that you would like us to solve and to help you with?
Oh, we lost Heiter. Let me come back in.
I'm back.
I don't know how we lost
Right.
you. That's me and my fat fingers.
Welcome back.
Welcome back. So in terms of kind of features, so you've got a Power Tools roadmap. You've got an open roadmap on GitHub.
Yes. Let me share. Maybe I can find it.
Yeah.
So
I know lots of people have been following the TypeScript issue on there for a long time.
yes. So there is a roadmap. I can tell you. So right now, we are kind of tackling the biggest paper cuts. We are improving. We're working on performance. There are some breaking changes coming. We are heavily focused on improving documentation. By documentation, I mean JS docs support, so then you can have better developer experience in your IDE. We would love to improve it in an iterative way, the contributing guidelines. That's a living document, and I truly, personally, individually care about it a lot, because I love everybody to be able to contribute and to help, regardless of your experience or proficiency with AWS or Lambda. So one of the, for the future, let's say that for the production ready milestones, we are going to make it as production ready as possible to fine tune a couple of aspects. I do see, for instance, a lot of RFC that are already open by the community. So for example, I saw somebody open a new Lambda timeout logger utility, validation utilities, a utility that as a customer, I really wanted to have when I was at the zone, like a testing factories to make testing more easy. An idempotency utility that it's also idempotency utility, which is already also in the Python Power Tool. So definitely when it comes to utilities that are already existing in Python, we would follow a similar behavior if implemented for sure.
Yeah, so that link we've shared in the chat is a link to your production ready milestone that you're working towards for TypeScript, and you've got a lot there. So obviously, folks, if you want to contribute, if you've got comments on some of those items, go through and comment. But also, I'll share a link to the entire roadmap. Where did I go? I've lost it. Okay, there we go. To the entire roadmap, so you can contribute to the other languages as well. So actually a question for both of you. So if someone wants to contribute to one of the projects, because I know you would love for more external contributors, what's the best way to go around doing that? Like, do you have issues that are marked as good first issues, or what's a good way to contribute?
Sorry, you want to go first?
Okay. So right now, because of the current time, it's difficult for us to kind of find good first issues, because we are implementing the biggest chunks, and we're trying to add as more example, like issues that are easier to tackle as possible. That's because my advice, especially if you're new to contributing in general, or if this is the first time that you're trying to contribute to this project, it's just to start with something small, and then kind of iteratively increase the scope of your changes and getting more familiar with the repo and so on. Some folks already did it, so that's great. And I love for other folks to be able to do it, but definitely we're gonna be focusing on the good first issue label a lot in the future.
Yeah. Definitely. There's a quick question on sorry, Aitor.
No problem.
Do you have an initial version of the contributing guidelines for the project?
I think it was mostly a link to the contributing guidelines.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll just dump it in there. I'll find it. Okay. Cool. Aitor, as you're saying, okay, how do you want people to contribute? Because obviously it's more than just TypeScript; it's everything else. Java. You got a new language coming?
Let's pause on that one. Let me make sure how we can contribute, and then we can tackle what's next. Yeah. So there are multiple ways to contribute. So opening an issue first, we have issue templates. So you can either find something, for instance, there's a bug into it. You can tell us what it is. How can we make it better? There are documentation suggestions and improvements. For us, documentation is the most important piece. So it has to be there, and it has to have working examples. It has to cater for a wider audience. It has to be there. And we just launched our tutorial, actually, our first ever tutorial, to show you how you can add one feature at a time to see how that looks like if you were starting today from scratch. We also have feature requests in general. We also have RFCs. So if you're trying to propose something new, like the new idea of logging timeout, open up a feature request first. As we see traction on that, then we would likely going to ask you, could you please open an RFC? Then we can flesh out the details about how does the user experience looks like. Have you considered an enterprise using this as well? Have you considered people with no background on serverless or Lambda? Or there are multiple discussions. We usually take it from there. We also label issues, good first issues, help wanted. In the roadmap, we have pretty well-defined, I would say, details on what the roadmap looks like in terms of what's the backlog, what are pieces we already vetted and say, please help us. I'll give you an example. If you have experience using Redis, for instance, we have a feature called idempotency, and we would love to have Redis as one of the backends supported for idempotency. We just didn't have the time. But also, we've got 48 contributors so far just on the Python one. Michael, which I think is here, is one of them. There's Ron from CyberArk. There's so many other people there, including people from AWS, from Tom, Nicholas. I could go on trying to name everyone I know. But yes, so please help us on any issue templates you find, roadmap. And we also have a Slack. Come join us, come hang out. There's so much that we can talk and share.
I never knew you had a Slack. I feel left out that I didn't know that.
Yes.
No. So, quick one. So, yeah, there's a few questions here. I don't know. I think I might know the answer to this one. But yeah, since Lambda Powertools has an official AWS layer now, the next step for AWS might be to include it in the official runtime, at least for Python. Could you see a point? So that's the question. Could you see a point where you see Powertools just being a default part of, part of the runtimes? They already package the SDKs. Theoretically, there's no reason why it shouldn't be. Short term, I can understand, because it's different teams building it. But, would it be useful? Or are there use cases where you might not need Powertools and maybe it'll be, it'll create too much overhead? What are your thoughts on Powertools being a default with the runtime?
I think the first question, is it useful? Definitely. And the numbers and people actually using it and the number of customers actually tell us it is. Whether it's going to ship into as part of the runtime, that's a different story. And something we would need your help just to suggest the AWS Lambda teams and their developer advocates on how useful that is. If that's something you want, give a +1 and share what the use case would be for you to have that in the runtime. And like anything in AWS, it kind of works backwards from what customers want. There's also a clear separation on when we say Lambda Powertools versus AWS Lambda. AWS Lambda is the formal team behind the product that you use, and Lambda Powertools is not developed by the service teams. It's developed by solutions architects and people all around. So there's a difference on, we wouldn't have the privilege, if you will, to say, let's ship into the runtime. There's a lot more questions to be asked and maintainability and long-term support for that chip. So ideally in the future, absolutely. I mean, why not? If you could already just instantiate a Lambda function from the console and get all the best practices already right at the beginning without having to go through the documentation and multiple tabs, if you like, then I think it's a win-win for everyone.
I think that might be a quite tricky one to pull off, just because, at least certainly from my perspective, if it's something that exists in the Lambda environment already, and I most likely still want to run tests that executes my code locally. So as part of my development flow, that means I'm going to have it locally anyway, because these are constructs that are used by my code. Then that means I'm still have to bring it into my development environment, regardless if I want to run those tests. Then kind of that can defeat the value of having everything available in the Lambda environment, apart from maybe smaller packaging. But then that creates other problems in terms of, okay, what I've tested locally is different from what's running in the AWS environment. And also, I guess it's going to make it harder for you to introduce breaking changes to these essentially and these layers of tooling. I think Sarah, you mentioned that there's something that you guys are working on that are potentially breaking changes. So this is the sort of thing that I think would be quite difficult to do if it's something that people expect to be in the Lambda environment.
I think I would break that into two again. You mentioned that it could be hard for customers to do that locally, as it's not that very different when you use AWS SDKs or some of the libraries like ImageMagick for JavaScript, for instance, and other pieces we offered already as part of the runtime. However, the key difference is making sure customers know what versions are in the runtime, so then they can add the development dependencies and do it there. And then when it comes to breaking changes, we follow semantic versioning. Obviously, changing the runtime with the latest additional features and so forth, that's a challenge we have to do it and trying to resolve this internally. But for Sarah's points,
so go on.
Yeah. So in Lambda Powertools, we follow semantic version. So in the case of any new Lambda Powertools like TypeScript, it wouldn't go GA as is. So it would be as beta, which gives customers the opportunity to share what the feedback, what the user experience should look like, which is exactly what Sarah and the team is doing now. So that allows to have these breaking changes, which is one that just happened recently. And for Python, for instance, we haven't had a breaking change for the past 14 months for data now.
For now, let's see. We're gonna.
So the semantic versioning is obviously is good practice, but then I don't think it's going to help you if the version that's in the environment is updated to the latest version, right? That's the thing.
Yes. Yeah. This is part of the. Without diving into details of there are more questions should be discussed internally. One of the challenges with the Lambda runtimes is how often can you keep up to date? You're not going to keep updating the runtime every single day because it could break a bunch of expectations or assumptions that customers may have. So that's a bigger question than Lambda Powertools in the runtime, but more about how do we keep the runtime up to date when external signals come in and yet keep it, stable, I guess, which is the most important one.
Oh, you can always do what they've done with the JavaScript SDK. Version 3 is the latest version, and they don't ship that with the Lambda runtime at all. They've just stayed with 2 instead of shipping both. Probably not to break things, but anyway. Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think we definitely send a link to this chat to the product team and the Lambda AWS Lambda product team.
Maybe they are watching. Who knows?
Hopefully, they should be awake. Yeah, it's the middle of the day for them, so it should be good. Yeah, we just so we've got a question here quickly from Christian. So if developers never get in touch with Lambda Powertools, so if they've never used Lambda Powertools, what would be a good first step to enable them to use this library? You talked about a tutorial, documentation. Where's a good place to start?
Yeah, so that would definitely vary per runtime. Let me share, Sarah, what's the best way to start on the TypeScript?
That's a very good question because TypeScript does have a reputation of being a bit tough as a language to start with. I can speak for my own experience when I started using TypeScript. I think there was a lot of clarity over the language and its behavior and the benefits. I do think, and I gave this feedback also to the TypeScript team, by the way, back in the days, that I found that the whole ecosystem around it, like tsconfig, and how do you do the transpiling and so on, all the developer experience, that can be a bit of a barrier if you are new to the language and to the ecosystem, even if you're already used to JavaScript. So when it comes to getting started with the language, I can tell you the way I did it is like the content from the community, blog posts and tutorials in general, that helps. Also, I was asked, if you have a component on lack when you work in a company that does use TypeScript at scale, like for instance, the zone, I think it depends on the team. At the beginning, everybody was using JavaScript, but I think at least in Amsterdam, everybody started using TypeScript. So then we started using it at scale. And that also that level of exposure using TypeScript at enterprise grade level, that gives you more confidence with the language and so on, and also helps you learning from others. When it comes to the AWS Lambda Powertool TypeScript, this is something, so how can we make it easier for people who are new, let's say, I'm not saying new to the language, but for people who can benefit from some guidance and something that can help it kickstart things out. Definitely there is an issue open that is related to cookie cutters, like projects that can help you bootstrapping. Right now, if you want to get started, we already have in the beta preview is some example in CDK that lets you build a Lambda in CDK in your AWS environment, that leverage all the 3 utilities that we launched, which is Logger, Tracer, and Metrics. So you already have a working example in TypeScript that works. But in general, we are looking for ways to make it even more simple for people, but that's going to be later on a later stage for sure.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the documentation now. Yeah, you've got 3 examples. I think they're all using SAM, not CDK. But yeah, the documentation is actually what you've got is already in a very, very good state. I have a tendency to complain on Twitter about bad documentation, and I would not complain about yours.
Well, trust me. No, but I think you have no idea how much conversations are in our team, in the global team around documentation, contributing and everything, getting started tutorial. I think everything is an iteration, and I think a lot of us have also a developer background, and for us, it's also important that it's easy to just use it. And documentation is super important.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the big do not use in production warning at the top of everything.
But the thing is, because people, I've been on the other side. Like before joining AWS, I used to be on the other side, and I know people can be saying, that's fine. I mean, we can just use it, But I think that it's good to make things clear, and then making warnings.
Yeah, I think it was. I just saw the comment. Hey, Michael. Michael's actually helped a lot in the documentation. We had idempotency documentation for a while, and then when we thought it was good because we spent so many hours in documentation, I sent you a link on the private chat that took us 7 hours non-stop writing just to get the first draft of the batch utility for Lambda Powertools in Python. And Michael's looked at the Python dependency and said, man, this documentation looks great, but you're not telling the use cases for API Gateway by dependency. And then he just took, I don't know how many days. Let me revamp all the documentation, all of this, and then we ended up exposing additional features I forgot for customers. So documentation for us is like, it's basically a product. It has to be. It's important.
Yeah, it's really refreshing to see parts of AWS who definitely have that philosophy, because I don't know if it's shared with some of your colleagues in Seattle. I'm allowed to say that because I don't work for Amazon. But yeah, so I think a lot of this all talks to developer experience. I think Jan, I think yourself, myself, we've both been using Lambda almost from day one. Jan, what are your thoughts on how the developer experience has improved around Lambda and the ecosystem over the years? What do you think the state of it is now compared to, say, 2015, when you go in Stack Overflow and you ask a question and no one's ever asked it before and there's no answers? What are your thoughts on the current state of the Lambda development experience?
I think it's much more complete compared to what it was, but at the same time, I think it's also much more complicated. So, so I think now when it comes to actually understanding and explaining what Lambda is becoming there's a lot of if and buts than what it was before, just really simple use case. I think that speaks to the maturity of the platform. Before it's very simple. It does this one thing, and then there's 9 different things that you can't really do. Now it's okay for each of these 9 things. There's this other feature you can look at, but when you use it, it's not super clear. And I think that's in general, that's been probably AWS in general. I think there's a lot of different similar services. For example, like when do you use which? That's always been a struggle for a lot of people. To things like when do you use EventBridge versus SNS versus SQS versus DynamoDB streams, Kinesis streams, manage the Kafka, and the list goes on and on. But I think the developer experience in general is night and day. Nowadays there's so many people. You go to any number of forums and communities on Slack or Twitter or whatever. You find lots of really knowledgeable people who can give you answers, and you can reach out to people like Heitor and a bunch of other people from AWS on social media that are usually quite responsive, and some of them tells you way more than it should. I think Simon is a good example of that. People who just probably don't follow the AWS guideline quite as closely as some people. But I think in general, it's just the community is much bigger, much more active than it was 2015. Which back then everyone's kind of just trying to figure out how to do this one thing all independently, separately. And I think nowadays there is quite a big body of common, I guess, wisdom that a lot of people. There's a lot of conventions and the good practices or leading practices that sort of emerge, and people are following them. But at the same time, you still have a lot of people who are just discovering Lambda for the first time, and they're still learning those, through the mistakes that we all made a couple of years ago. And that's kind of, a lot of what my work entails, is just helping people, sharing the mistakes that I've learned and the things that I've learned, by doing.
I want to give, and I just want to give a shout out to the AWS community, and that includes you, Jan, because I can't express how helpful all of the tech content that you produce, blog posts, talks, and I think a lot of credit I have to give, of course, to the AWS service team, absolutely, and the continuous improvement and the innovation and how they improve the developer experience. But I just want to acknowledge the importance of the AWS community when it comes to tech content production, because I think that rich ecosystem also made an impact and enabled other people too. So just clap for that.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. Like, you've got the situation now where the service teams keep adding features because because they want to expand the use case for Lambda and these platforms, but with every feature it increases complexity. I think that's where Powertools is helping apply best practice and actually remove some of that complexity. Would you agree with that at all? Is it like removing some complexity for users? Is it improving that developer experience?
I don't know if I would say that every new feature adds complexity, because I do think that there are a lot of examples in which they reduce complexity, but I of course am inclined to agree with the idea that in the way the goal of the AWS Lambda Powertools in general is to make the adoption of best practices easier. So if you can call it reducing complexity, that can be a different way of approaching it. But Heitor, what do you say?
This is so common of a question that we have as a tenant in the project called progressive, that we want to meet customers at the stage where they are and incrementally adopt a utility, a feature, one at a time, and not trying to shoehorn them. You must do this way, and that's the only true way of doing things. That never works. I think it's something that Jan said. I think we've gone a long way. We've hired a lot more technical writers to improve our documentation. I think we're pretty good at that. But it's hard to do it at scale at AWS. There's just too many services, too many people, too many service teams. And it's hard to make it a documentation that spans multiple service teams, for instance, or features that spans multiple use cases. And those features come from new customers, new ways of looking at that those people weren't that back in a few days. So in some cases, I could say, yes, it reduced a lot of complexity. For example, the one that we added for Lambda on handling partial failures natively. It's something I asked, I don't know, 4.5 years ago, and now it's finally in, and it's great to see that. We definitely can't cater for every use case or reduce complexity in every single feature, but I think we're getting there. And I think before in the days, we would say Lambda is the novel, and Lambda is now becoming the boring technology. More and more people are becoming more familiar and more comfortable with the possible failure modes and tools and caveats. And like Sarah said, the community plays a huge piece there. We can write all the docs we want, but it's truly when you take those features, those services, glue them together, and you battle test, and you realize, oh, it's missing this use case, it's missing this feature, it's missing that.
Yeah, definitely. I think, how do you think Lambda's changed the role of a developer? Obviously, I think myself and Jan have talked about it before, where Lambda seems to like give a developer superpowers. You can do significantly more, but with it's the old Spider-Man quote. With great power comes great responsibility. How do you see Lambda having like changed the role of a dev? And how important is this kind of tooling in enabling developers?
Sarah, you want to try first, and then Jan? Because I'm speaking almost all the time, so Sarah and Jan, and then
yeah.
I personally find it super empowering in the sense that it makes, like, I think giving you superpower is really not giving enough justice to it. The idea that you can, and I know also as by working with customers as a solutions architect now, you can essentially do anything you want. Like the sky is the limit. It enables startups to create their own business. It allows enterprises to deliver business value in a very short amount of time. It allows developers that maybe are more front-end focused, slowly approaching the cloud ecosystem because of the ease of the developer experience and the usability and so on. So I think the idea that is definitely innovative, and I also am confident that while it might feel that now it's boring, I'm confident that we still haven't seen anything yet. So for the future, I expect a lot more innovation and more value brought to the community. So that's it.
Yeah, I do think it's on one hand, it's definitely more empowering. I mean, I'm doing things as a one-man backend team that you would have taken teams of people to deliver in the much longer time frame than I can nowadays. At the same time, it means that you are responsible for a lot more than just your code. You have to make a lot of decisions, not just in terms of the code level, but also not just in terms of what you write. How you provision your resources, but also in terms of how does your system fit together as a whole, and kind of force you to think about the system rather than just individual components. There's a lot more decisions around at the architecture level. What services do I use? How do I make them fit together? And how does that deliver the sort of business value in the most cost efficient and the most performant way, and understanding how the platform works. I think the difference is that you used to do a lot of those things anyway, but you do them at a much lower sort of infrastructure level, which tend to be almost a little bit different every single time, because different. Whereas now the stuff is things you're learning how to do with different AWS services. I think those knowledges are much more reusable. They have to be refreshed every now and then because of new features, new platform changes means that some of the things that you learned before may not be applicable anymore. But certainly I'm finding that things I'm learning along the way are now very much reusable when I go to different projects, because they are the things that I learn about how the certain AWS services work together. And it's the same whether or not I'm building an e-commerce platform versus a healthcare app versus something else. There's a lot of these things that they're just kind of the same experience kind of reinforce how makes your experience with working with those services a lot better as you go. And certainly, I'm finding myself spending a lot less time writing code and the more time just thinking about how the system works together. And then once I've got the right combination of things, I don't have to write a lot of code to actually get what I need to get to the customer to where they want to be. So I think in terms of like that's power, it's just amazing how much you can get done so quickly.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things with that I've found is that obviously the scope of what you do as a developer changes. Because I'm a bit older than you folk. I remember back in the day when you'd have a team who looked after your network, another team that looked after your firewall, another team that looked after your storage infrastructure, and then you'd have another team that looked after your server infrastructure, your operating system, then another team of DBAs, and your developers would be somewhere else writing code and literally just throwing it over the wall, and you have all the idle processes. And now you have one individual can do all of that themselves, but it does mean that that developer who was throwing things over the wall now needs to learn about things like observability and things like that. Like wasn't really something you had to worry about, 20 years ago, 15, 16 years ago. And now it's obviously, and that's the kind of thing that Powertools helps with, definitely. Jan, do you remember the days where you didn't really have to worry, you just kind of focus on a feature and let someone else worry about everything else?
Yeah, I remember working in the banks where, like you said, I do my bit, someone else looks after it. And the thing is, if something goes down in the middle of the night, it's not me that gets woken up. And I think that's one of the things I learned once I sort of went away from that world, is that when you put developers on call to look after their own systems, when it goes down, suddenly things just got better because nobody wants to get woken up in the middle of the night. So they go through that extra mile to make sure that whatever they're shipping is it's actually going to work. It's more robust and more reliable when it's their own on time on the line if things that doesn't work.
Yeah, that's good. A quick comment from Leandro here is, what's the best way to adopt serverless, understand trade-offs, especially the shift from monitoring to observability, and Powertools can help that? And and hi to Sarah. What are your thoughts on the best way to adopt and serverless, and how does Powertools enable that?
So I just want to clarify, as Aitor mentioned, I think the 3 utilities that were launched from TypeScript, which is Logger, Tracer, and Metrics, they are observability related. However, as Aitor mentioned, Powertools is more than observability. It's also, I would call it, it allows you and enables you with operational excellence in general, which does include like telemetry, emitting telemetry, and relying on the data to take informed decisions. So the thing is, one of the things that when we look, for instance, at the observability related utility that I mentioned, and we look at logs, we look at metrics, we look at traces, what they are, in fact, they are data points. They are data points that tells you what is the state, what is the health of your environment, what is the health of your workload, and you, the person who built it, the person who owns it, you know best what can help you, in the sense that sometimes it makes sense to use all of 3 of them, sometimes it makes sense to use just some of them. So I think depending on the use case, and how critical is your application on the is your application, and how and also I want to also link to the progressive tenet that we have. It also depends on how comfortable you are by using certain technologies, and where are you with the cloud in your cloud adoption journey. I think it's very powerful that you have these opportunities to adopt best practices. But yeah, so I would look at what helps you best in general. I don't know if that answers the question. I would definitely start with normally I see from the Python Power Tool that the logger is the most one of the most loved ones, because I think everybody is already familiar with logs, and it's something that resonates in terms of mental model with many people. So I think that is the most approachable. Tracer can help you also with performance and to understand how your different components, how performant is your code, but also how the different components within your AWS environment talk to each other. And metrics, of course, it can be useful to emit business metrics or operational metrics that are not available in AWS. So that's, for instance, one way of approaching this utility.
I think, Leandro, if you're talking about in general how best to learn about serverless technologies and understand the trade-offs, I think the great thing is that you can build something and you almost don't have to pay for it, because if you're using serverless components, you're not going to pay for it unless there's a certain amount of traffic. So I think the best way to learn is just by doing. Maybe take one of the example projects out there, like the airline example that the Hightool has, or the e-commerce platform thing that Nicholas published. Maybe and you can put a link to that. So take those projects out and just try to build something similar yourself, or following the video examples that Hightool recorded when he was doing the airline thing. Just learn by doing. That's by far the best way. And one of the things I do a lot is just pose hypothetical questions about what happens if this thing, if I'm using Lambda with SQS, what happens if this particular weird situation happens, and then you just try it. You build an experiment, and then you see what actually happens, and then that really helps in terms of building a mental model of how system actually works. And that's one of the things that I find really helps in terms of figuring out things that are not covered by AWS documentations. AWS documentation is really much focused on the happy path, a lot of the sort of common use case. But then once you start trying to come up with the weird use cases that maybe not covered by the documentations, you really try to start to understand how the system works under the hood. Because none of this stuff is magic. All of this is just engineering, wrapped around some very nice abstractions. But so a lot of those things that you can kind of figure out once you start poking around at the machine.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of having, working through it. Like the way I've learned most things around Lambda is, or any serverless platform, is actually just using it. Like you can read as much documentation as you want, but you've got to use it. I was looking at my GitHub profile. I've got over 60 repositories in that, and I'm in multiple other organizations, and those are all, most of them are like abandoned side projects. But for me, completing the side project wasn't the point of doing the project. The side project was a way for me to learn how to do something, and how to experiment and how to test things, and is this a good idea or a bad idea, in a way that's not costing someone else money. Then again, I have made mistakes that have cost other people money, but we won't talk about that on here. So we're going to talk about Power Tools. What is the future for Power Tools from here? Haito, do you want to maybe kind of give us an overview of what's next? We know TypeScript is going to be production ready like in a day or two. I'm joking, it's not. But yeah, what's next for Power Tools, Haito?
Yeah. So let me start with languages, because there's just too much happening in terms of what's next. So Java, if you go, let me see if I can have a quick link. I can see Mark is already there. There's a pull request if you want to see how a feature in Power Tools is being implemented from the ground up, following contracts and following everything. We are implementing now idempotency for Java. So that's Jerome and also Pankaj helping out on the review. So this is the most complex feature we have in Lambda Power Tools. It took us so long to get there. And then thanks to Tom as well from the Python one. So that's for Java and specifically how we get there. And for Python, we are still working on a bunch of stuff for documentation. So tutorial was one of them. We also have a few paper cuts to solve. And then we're going to start looking into how does V2 look like? Not from a breaking change perspective, but how can we do modularization? One of the challenges we have right now is the size of AWS SDK. It makes up 98% of our package size today. So we need to essentially change our approach. Just to give an idea, the entire Lambda Powertools 15 features as of now, including the typing pieces, is 1.4 megabytes. So we want to make sure that this is easy to consume from customers, easy to add one feature at a time if they want, or the entire piece into that. So that's something we're going to be looking at. There were comments on OpenTelemetry. It's something that we want to be looking more closely in V2. I don't think there are a few pieces that are ready yet for the scale that we need in terms of production ready on the customer's use cases, but I think we can get there. So, but we're not going to make any rush decisions on adopting that yet now, because TypeScript's already implemented, the tracer for X-ray, and then other pieces that come into it. The big ones, I think, without giving any dates, is we're looking at .NET next. And if enough customers kind of come and help us, maybe Golang, I don't know, but .NET is the next one.
Okay. Do you need contributors for .NET? Do you have has someone volunteered to take the lead in .NET? Where are we pointing all your future contributors to?
So in the roadmap we have the .NET. Let me go back in here. In fact, .NET was, I think, the hardest to find people with the knowledge in metaprogramming and with enough knowledge on Lambda and serverless to help out. So first we start with AWS people, because we're still trying to get the contracts right, and then we launch a beta, and then once that's in place, then we welcome every customer that has enough experience into that. So now that we solved some of the performance challenges with .NET for Lambda Powertools to have a similar experience and yet not impact cold starts and pieces like that, we're finalizing a few things, and once we're ready, then we can publish beta. So that's Steve and Tiago and Amir from AWS. So once it's there, you should be seeing a roadmap title on .NET moving to coming soon. So keep an eye on that card. That's what we're trying to work on.
Yeah, and you used to be a .NET dev, C#.
Yeah.
I think he was F#, right? He didn't like .NET. He was like F# was.
Oh, it's all the same.
F#, quite a bit of .NET, of C# as well. But yeah, F# was my love.
There, you've got a contributor. Okay, and then you're looking at Go as another option as well. And I'm sure Rust will come at some point as well, because everything's going to be written in Rust, apparently.
You joke about that, but Go, I think, is the hardest Lambda Powertools should ever create for us. It's so hard. The user experience is hard to get similar experience that we have in other languages, but maybe we get there. So if anyone watching or listening have ideas on what the experience should look like, give us a shout. We have an email as well that you can reach out to us.
Yeah. You should reach out to Matt Weigel and the service team, because he created the Sparta framework.
Sparta
framework.
Yeah.
It's been sunsetted, but yeah, he's in AWS. So yeah, use phone tool, look him up, do it. Reach out, use internal networks. And a couple 100,000 people at AWS. It's all good. And we've got a very important question. Sarah, you need to introduce your cat.
All right. Yeah. Sorry. If you saw me laughing, it's because I was reading the comments. It was not because of what you were saying. Anyway. So her name is Beppy, and yeah, it's time to give her food. So that's why she is here, trying to get my attention. Beppy is her name when I got her, and it's a Dutch name that it's usually given to an old lady. Oh, there she is.
She is.
So
she's beautiful.
no, she goes in the. I don't know if I can get her here. Sorry. So no, she doesn't want to. Okay. No, but it's the name that you would give at a woman. It's an old school name that you would give to a woman in the Jordaan, which is a neighborhood in Amsterdam, which is where I live. And I kept it because my own grandpa was called Beppy. So in Italian, Beppy is the shortcut for a male name, but she's a and in the Netherlands it's a female name, so it's a bit weird. But yeah, long story short.
She's a great cat. She can definitely join us anytime.
Yes,
So,
she does join a lot of calls. Yeah.
that's good. No, I'm forever trying to stop my dogs from joining calls, but thankfully they've fallen asleep. Yeah, they're a little bit louder than your cat, unfortunately. Fortunately, I think that's kind of time. Yeah, it's been a good hour, good chatting about all things Power Tools. So if folks want to contribute, go to the GitHub repos. There's multiple GitHub repos, one for each of the languages, but there's a kind of parent GitHub repo. Where's the entry point? You start with a roadmap repo and then find the one that's relevant to your languages, or should I just post all the repos to the different languages in each? Actually, I'll do that. I'll make life easy. I'll post the links to all the repos in the description.
This is one of the reasons what's coming next, but I couldn't share because we're still kind of figuring out what to do in the best way. So the roadmap repo will be renamed to just without the roadmap. So that's going to be the entry point to showcase what's the feature parity across all of them. Each Lambda Powertools runtime cross-link between each other, so at least you don't get confused. Oh, we have this as well, don't forget.
Okay, yeah, so I can email you. Cool. Okay, so if you want to get involved, there's an email address there. We just put in the chat, and then the roadmap repo has, which I'll put in again. The roadmap repo has links to the other other repos. So yeah, so that's kind of the entry point. They raise GitHub issues. Obviously, if the other quick question we had was about voting on issues. How do you decide priority? Is it just thumbs up and all on an issue, and then you basically do it that way? Okay, so if there's any issue you really want, that you're really interested in, and you want shipped first, add your emoji, your thumbs up to it. Yeah, and that's it. So thank you all for your time. Jan, Heitor, Sarah, Beppy. It's been good.
Our pleasure. Yeah. I think I just maybe you should put on your stop, Sarah. Jan, I think we should meet up. We live in the same country. We haven't seen each other yet, right?
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. It's insane. Like there's so many also colleagues that I haven't seen and people that I interact. Yeah. We should.
Definitely, yeah. We all live in the Netherlands, so yeah, make a plan, people. Okay, well, yes. Thanks everyone. Yeah, hopefully, as a general, if you like this format, probably going to try and do one of these every 2 weeks with another group of folks. You know, not just a matter of like listening to a talk and you know, non-interactive, hour-long conversations about anything serverless. So if there's anything you want to hear about, just drop a message and we'll find people to talk about it. Okay. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers. Bye-bye.